Hi, it's the end of 2015, and that means I'm going to talk about my favourite books for the year. And I've decided to go with the top 15 books of 2015, and I've broken that up into top 5 books in translation, top 5 classics or modern classics, and the top 5 more recent releases. So first up, I'm going to do my top 5 books in translation, and starting at number 5, I'm going to go with The Story of a New Day by Eleanor Bronte, and this was translated by Anne Goldstein. This is the second book in the Neapolitan series, and I really enjoy the series. I think this is a far better book than the first one, My Brilliant Friend, and this explores the lives of two friends from the age of 16 up until about 28. I haven't read the other two books in the series, but this by far is my favourite, and I'm looking forward to starting book 3 hopefully next year. At number 4, I have picked My Night in Chile by Roberto Bolaño. This was translated by Chris Andrews. And this is a really interesting book structurally. It is told in a single paragraph. It tells the story of a priest on his deathbed. He's suffering from a fever and he's recounting his life, but he's in this feverish haze. So things are not quite as they seem, and you begin to wonder if what he's telling you is true or just a symptom of his feverish dreams. And I really love this book. I can't wait to read so much more of Bolaño's writing, and I know I need to read a lot more South American authors, but I think I found my favourite at the moment and can't wait to read more of his books. At number 3, I'm going to go with Red April by Santiago Recalio, and this is a author from Peru, and this was translated by Edith Grossman, and this is a mystery type, kind of like a police procedural mixed with a political thriller, and it's talking about this political unrest happening within Peru and a cover-up that's going on as well. And the investigator in charge uncovers so much more, and it goes down the rabbit hole. I really enjoyed this book, and it was a really interesting insight to society that I know hardly anything about. I just really enjoyed diving into that culture. At number 2 is Banana Yoshimoto's The Lake, and I read this fairly recently, and I've probably talked about it a fair bit since reading it. This was translated from Japanese by Michael Emmerich. I have done a review video of this book, and I really like the psychological relationship elements of it, and it's a real slow burn that you just get swept up with, and I love that about this book and can't wait to read more Banana Yoshimoto's books. My favourite book in translation was Limonov by Emmanuel Carrier, and this was translated by John Lambert. And this is the story of a Russian politician. It is a fictionalized biography about Edmund Limonov, who founded the National Bolshevik Party, which became almost like a militant group that were trying to bring back the Soviet era within Russia. And this was translated from French, so it is a French author writing about Russian politics, and I found it really interesting. It was beautifully written, and it was a very interesting topic, and I learned so much. Even though it is considered a work of fiction, a lot of it is biographical, and he spent a lot of time interviewing Limonov to understand him and all the good and bad things that happened because of him and throughout his life. And that's why it was my number 1 pick for 2015 in translated fiction. Now moving on to my favourite book in the classic and modern classic genres. My first pick would be Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin, and this is a semi-autobiographical novel about his childhood, and most people know a fair bit about James Baldwin and his writing, and this was actually my first James Baldwin novel, and I thought it was fantastic, and I can't wait to read more of his books. And definitely one of the best books of 2015, and looking forward to reading so much more from him. At number 4, I went with Shirley Jackson's We've Always Lived in the Castle. This was also my first Shirley Jackson book, and I really liked that gothic feel to the novel, and I read this around Halloween. Even though it's not really a Halloween type book, I really like the style, and I read this kind of like a public opinion of the Blackwell sisters, and everyone's gossiping it, even though there's been a trial. and also an acquittal. The town still believed there was foul play, and it was really interesting to talk about how people make up their own mind through gossip, and it doesn't matter what else happens, they don't seem to change their opinion. As the novel does unfold, you begin to understand what happens with this mystery within the novel, but what the town think happened and what actually happened is different. But I won't give too much away on that. At number 3, I went with Bonjour Trustees, and this is also a translated book, translated by Heather Lloyd from the French, and I already had 5 books in translated fiction, but I still had classics that I thought were brilliant, even if they are translated, and I think being a classic, it still was worth talking about. This is a collection of 2 books, Bonjour Trustees and A Certain Smile. I really like Bonjour Trustees, but A Certain Smile just didn't quite match the style or had that story for which I really enjoyed, and I really recommend checking this book out. At number 2 is also a French book. This is The Story of an Eye by Georges Bataille, and this is a really weird erotic novel with a lot of surrealist elements and quite disturbing, but underneath it all, it's not quite an erotic novel. There's some real interesting themes being explored, and if you read the afterword, there's a critical analysis of a book by Roland Barthes, which is really interesting and really changes your perspective of what actually is happening in the book. Georges Bataille also, in the introduction, hints at what he's trying to do with this novel, so I went into the novel looking for those symbolism and expecting to explore something completely different to an erotic adventure between the characters within the book. And finally, my favourite classic in 2015 is a cult classic, and that is The Valley of the Dolls, which tells the story of 3 different women trying to make something of their lives in the 1960s. All 3 of these women have very different lives, but they're friends and they try and make their mark on the world. I just love reading a book where you just are part of these people's lives through their ups and downs. And there's more downs than ups within the book, but I really found it interesting and a really interesting feminist look at women in society and making their mark on the world. And I think it was well worth reading and recommended to everyone to read. Now, moving on to the more recent released books. Number 5, I went with Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And this is a collection of essays he wrote to his adolescent son about the state of the world, and focusing a lot on racism within America and trying to understand the history and trying to explain the world to his son. Although sadly racism is still a huge problem all over the world and it needs to be addressed, and I think a book like this really is a powerful way to really understand how people are living. I found this perspective of this issue really interesting and powerful, and the writing was just perfect. I loved every moment of this book, even though it was so heartbreaking and so gut-wrenching and so important to read. And number 4 is Aquaria by David Vann, and David Vann really writes domestic issues really well. It's really dark and gritty, and this is a book about a girl who befriends a older man, well, at the aquarium, but it's not a sexual relationship, but her mum does freak out about their friendship and things begin to unravel, and it really explores family secrets and the issues that her mum has faced and how she pushes all her pain onto her daughter. Even though she's trying to protect her daughter, the pain that she has just overflows into her daughter's life, and the daughter has to deal with the same sort of issues her mother is dealing with. And I really like that book because of that, and I love David Vann because he writes really dark, disturbing family dramas. And this was his most recent book, and probably the most accessible of his books. If you want to read a dark family drama, then I definitely recommend reading David Vann. Number 3 on this list is Motherless Brooklyn by Jonathan Latham, and this was actually my first Latham book, and I think this is an amazing book about a guy suffering Tourette's growing up in Brooklyn. And this is interesting because it is a book about Tourette's, but it's also a pulpy crime novel. And Jonathan Lathan managed to blend the two different styles and genres together. So it felt like you were reading a crime novel, but you're really exploring what it would be like to be living with Tourette's and trying to understand the mindset of someone that has to deal with this issue all their lives or most of their lives. And I think that was really powerful and has made me want to read so much more of Jonathan Lathan's book, and that's why it's number 3 on my list. At number 2, I went with Howard's Ends is On the Landing by Susan Hill, and this is another non-fiction book. And this one's a book about books, and I've done a review video which turned into a discussion about memories and the books on my bookshelf. And I think it was one of my favourite videos I've done so far on BookTube, and I hope to be able to do more videos like that and kind of capture that same spirit of those videos. And this is a book that deals with memory and the books on your bookshelf and how each book has a story behind it. And Howard's End is On the Landing has a story behind it for me because I was reading this while my mother-in-law was sick in hospital and she eventually passed away. So there's that memory of sadness that sticks to the book. Even though I love the book, there is some sadness to it. And I think that kind of just makes the book a little more special to me. At number 1, and probably my favourite book of all 2015, is Girl at War by Sarah Novick. And this is a book that explores the collapse of Yugoslavia, and the Serbs and the Croatians are at war still. And this is a story of Anna, who's a young girl living in Croatia where the Serbs are still trying to attack, and it's a terrible place to live. But then it cuts to 10 years later where she's living in New York and she has to live through 9/11, and that event really brings up issues, and the book really explores the connection between the Soviet collapse and the stuff she had to deal with while in Croatia and living in America. And I thought that was really interesting, and this is a powerful debut novel, and I've recommended this already in a video before, but it's so great. And I think there's something about exploring the lives of other people and how they live that I really enjoy. Even though war is such a terrible thing, sometimes some powerful and heartbreakingly beautiful stories come from that situation, and Girl at War definitely is one of those books, and I think this is definitely my favourite of the year. So that's my top books of 2015. You might have noticed that I held up some, and they are the books that I own. For the majority of the books, they were all library books, and I need to learn to read more books from my shelves rather than go to the library all the time, but that is a goal for next year. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone else's top books of 2015 videos, and I'm really looking forward to 2016. If you want to find me elsewhere, all my links to social media are in the description below, and as always, thank you for watching.